There is a strange silence that settles over an off-season when the noise dies down but the story isn't finished, and that is exactly where the Toronto Blue Jays find themselves right now. It feels like the calm eye of a storm, the moment where you stop, look around, and realize something big is still coming. Welcome back to the Blue Jays Report, because today we're diving straight into the heart of an off-season that has been aggressive, chaotic, frustrating, and quietly brilliant all at the same time. This is the story of the swings that missed, the pivots that reshaped everything, and the one enormous name still circling the Rogers Center like a storm cloud that refuses to drift away. This winter began with hunger. Not polite hunger, not curiosity, but desperation for power. The Blue Jays came into the off-season knowing exactly what they lacked, and they chased it with conviction. Rumors flew like snow in January. Names were linked, disconnected, and linked again. Alex Bregman, Cody Bellinger, Bo Bichette extensions whispered in back rooms. And then there was Kyle Tucker, the dream scenario, the superstar bat that would have rewritten the franchise record books. Fans watched the chase unfold with hope in their eyes and dread in their stomachs, and when the dust settled, Toronto had swung hard and come up short on the very top tier of offensive talent. Yes, the Jays landed Kazuma Okamoto, a move that deserves respect and patience, but let's be honest, it wasn't the thunderbolt many expected. It was refinement, not revolution. And yet, here's where the story turns, because this front office didn't sulk. They didn't retreat. They didn't pretend everything was fine. Instead, they pivoted with fury, redirecting their resources towards something colder, sharper, and arguably more dangerous than raw power. Run prevention became the mission, and suddenly, the Blue Jays started building a pitching staff that looks less like a rotation and more like a weapon. The return of Shane Bieber felt like a statement. The blockbuster signing of Dylan Cease felt like a challenge to the rest of the league. Cody Ponce and Tyler Rogers added layers of depth and flexibility, and almost overnight, the Jays transformed themselves into a team built to suffocate opponents. But even as the arms piled up, there was a feeling that something wasn't quite complete. A loose thread dangling. Because the money, the Kyle Tucker money, the massive pile of cash that had been earmarked for a generational bat, was still there, untouched, waiting. This isn't about frugality. This isn't ownership pinching pennies. This is about allocation. When you set aside superstar money, you don't spend it on filler. You spend it on impact. And that brings us to the uncomfortable truth about the current rotation. It's excellent. It's deep. It's terrifying. And it's almost entirely right-hand. In the modern game, that's not just a quirk, it's a vulnerability. October baseball is a chess match, and showing up with one color on the board invites your opponent to counter. That's why the Framber Valdez rumors refuse to die. They don't feel like wishful thinking. They feel logical. Almost inevitable. Valdez represents the final piece of a puzzle that suddenly makes perfect sense. A dominant left-hander with postseason experience, a ground ball machine, and a presence that changes the geometry of an entire series. This isn't internet fantasy. This is strategy. To understand why this matters so much, we have to rewind slightly and peer into the alternate realities that almost became real. A recent revelation pulled back the curtain on just how wide a net the Blue Jays were casting before Dylan Cease put pen to paper. In an Ask Me Anything session, insider Ben Nicholson-Smith casually dropped a bombshell. Before Cease, the Jays were deep in conversations with multiple high-profile starters. Michael King, Tatsuya Imanaga, Zach Eflin. For a brief moment, any one of those arms could have been the centerpiece of this rotation. Think about how different the conversation would sound today if Eflin had signed instead of Cease. The noise. The arguments. The accusations of settling. King would have been praised for his pitchability, Imanaga for his artistry and market appeal, but Cease tells us exactly what this front office wants. Power. Dominance. They didn't want to survive lineups, they wanted to overwhelm them. Choosing Cease was a declaration of intent. But Nicholson-Smith didn't stop there. He addressed Framber Valdez directly, noting that the Jays have done extensive background work. Due diligence, yes, but also preparation. The caveat was clear. For this deal to happen, Valdez's market has to stall. And right now, the industry belief is that Baltimore sits in the driver's seat. Which turns this into something even bigger. An arms race inside the AL East. Baltimore took Eflin. Toronto took Cease. Now Valdez sits in the middle like a crown jewel, waiting for someone to blink. If the Blue Jays are serious about turning this pitching staff from excellent to legendary, this is the moment. The reports suggest the groundwork is laid. The question is whether they have the nerve to pull the trigger. Let's talk about why a left-hander changes everything. Look at the Jays rotation as it stands. Kevin Gausman, Jose Berrios, Shane Bieber, Dylan Cease, Trey Yuzvich, Cody Ponce. It's an embarrassment of riches, but it's also symmetrical in the worst way. Right-hand power across the board. Against teams like the Yankees and Orioles, that symmetry becomes predictable. Managers stack left-handed bats, shorten swings, and dare you to adjust. Framber Valdez destroys that comfort. His sinker from the left side eats left-handed hitters alive and forces righties to beat the ball into the ground. He doesn't just add balance, he erases matchups. And there's another layer that makes this even more compelling. The future. Kevin Gausman and Shane Bieber are both scheduled to hit free agency after 2026. That's not a distant concern, that's a ticking clock. Signing Valdez isn't just about next season. It's about continuity. It's about ensuring that when the roster inevitably changes, the rotation doesn't collapse under its own weight. Pair Valdez long-term with Cease and Berrios, and suddenly the Jays have a foundation that stretches well beyond a single competitive window. That's how sustained contenders are built. And then there's the money. The Kyle Tucker money doesn't disappear. If it isn't spent, fans will remember. You can't court a superstar and then plead restraint. That cash has to come back to the roster somehow, and if it's not going into a bat, it almost has to go into an arm of Valdez's caliber. The impact on the clubhouse would be immediate. Pitchers feeding off each other. Hitters knowing they only need 3 runs on most nights. That's how October games are won. Of course, adding Valdez creates chaos. Beautiful chaos. Someone has to move. Someone has to adapt. And that's where this conversation gets uncomfortable. If Valdez walks through the door, the rotation suddenly has 7 legitimate starters. There's no clean solution. Younger arms like Yuzvich have options and could dominate AAA until needed. Ponce could become a devastating long relief weapon. But even whispers of Jose Berrios shifting roles highlight just how absurd the depth would be. This would be the deepest pitching staff in baseball. A manager's dream. The ability to pull a starter in the 5th without fear. To run matchups aggressively. To grind opponents down over a series until they're begging for air. It would be ruthless. So here we are. The Blue Jays missed on the biggest bats, and that still stings. But what they've built instead might be even more dangerous. They flirted with King, Imanaga, and Eflin, but landed Cease. Now the final decision looms. Spend the money. Complete the vision. Or hold back and gamble on perfection without balance. I want to hear from you. Do you use the Kyle Tucker money to land Framber Valdez and create a super rotation that terrifies the league? Or do you save it for a mid-season bat and trust what you have? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Blue Jays Report. This story isn't finished yet, and the next chapter could change everything.